guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. So a couple days ago I made a video about Brooke Skylar Richardson in the case where she allegedly she alleged that her baby was stillborn and that she then buried her. If you don't know what happened, I would highly suggest watching that video first so this one makes sense. The reason I'm updating, and I don't do this very often, is because there were a lot of opinions in the comments and she has now gotten sentenced, and I don't really know how I feel about it.
Defendant Brooke Skylar Richardson not guilty of child endangerment. It does say we further find the defendant did not cause serious physical harm to the alleged victim, but that finding is not necessary as a matter of law. Verdict form number 4, we the jury in the above captioned case find the defendant Brooke Skylar Richardson guilty of the offense of abuse of a corpse. Ladies and gentlemen, are those the verdicts of the jury? Yes, sir. You may be seated. All right, again, you are now discharged from all your service. Does either side wish to have the jury polled? No, Your Honor. No, Your Honor. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you will now be returned to the jury room. Thank you for your service. Mr. Mullins is going to give you back your phones and such, and I will see you in a couple of minutes.
Teen acquitted of killing her baby says she's quote-unquote forever sorry. From the day the police showed up at the family's house to the day she was acquitted of murder, Brooke Skylar Richardson never spoke publicly about what happened to the baby girl, whom she named Annabelle. As strangers branded her a baby killer and she stared down the possibility of life in prison, the 20-year-old Ohio woman, who insisted her child was stillborn, kept her feelings to herself. Richardson's silence ended Friday when she stood in Warren County courtroom for her sentencing hearing. Addressing a judge and briefly turning to the rest of the room, she apologized repeatedly. "I just wanted to say how sorry I was," said Richardson, who goes by Skylar. "I can sometimes be selfish, but I would like to think that I've become better in the knowledge that I've upset everyone and hurt so many people with what I've done, and I am forever sorry." Now, you guys can let me know if I'm being nitpicky. Maybe I am. I think apologies have to be properly done or else they don't mean anything. But to say that you're sorry and that you've become better because you've upset everyone with what you've done, you shouldn't be sorry that people are upset. You should be sorry that you did what you did, which is allegedly just burying the child because it was stillborn, allegedly. So if we're assuming she's actually not guilty of killing the child, she should be sorry for what she did, which also I think includes neglect. But anyway, she should be sorry for burying that child and not going with the due process, but not to be sorry that she upset people, because that's like saying, oh, I'm sorry you were upset by this. That's not the same as being sorry that you did it, right? So in my last video, a lot of people were saying that I was being judgmental and that I've not been in her position, and yeah, I haven't been in her position. That's why I said, as an outsider, this is what it looks like. Aside from that, I would hope that if I were in her position, I would opt to make a better choice. I don't think it's unfair to say that the case is suspicious. I don't know whether she's guilty or not. I tended to think she was guilty of something, if not everything. However, that's just really my analysis, and you're allowed to disagree, of course. It was the conclusion of what Richardson's attorney called a nightmare, a tabloid saga in which the former high school cheerleader was accused of killing her newborn 2 days after her May 2017 prom. The lurid details of the case, including recanted allegations that Richardson burned the baby's corpse before burying it in her family's backyard, drew national headlines and turned the young woman into a pariah in her small hometown. Although jurors acquitted Richardson of most of the charges on Thursday, they convicted her of gross abuse of a corpse, a felony that carries a 1-year maximum sentence. Judge Donald Oda on Friday sentenced her to 7 days in jail, releasing her with credit for time served, but first he rebuked her for showing grotesque disregard for life in what he called a story of 2 little girls, Skylar Richardson and Annabelle Richardson. Now, one thing I do want to say, and I was discussing this with my husband last night, is that I think the way this case was treated was absolutely fucked up, in the sense that it just seemed like everything went wrong at every turn. For example, saying that the baby was burned and then taking it back. Like, if it were up to me, I would start everything over again. Like, I would drop everything we know until now, and it'll be hard to get rid of your bias, to be fair, but start all over again. Reanalyze everything, reanalyze the corpse, reanalyze the timeline, just do everything again. And I know that's impossible and isn't gonna happen, but ideally speaking, that's what I think should have happened, because I do think that it's inconsistent, and it seems like lazy work was done here, so I definitely don't think this was properly executed. I do appreciate that the judge did call her out though. I firmly believe, in fact I know, Miss Richardson, in my heart, that if you had made different decisions in this case, Annabelle would be here today, Otis said. And I know it may be difficult for you to hear. Some people are inclined to think to themselves, this is America, we will kill unborn babies every day. But I don't think of it that way. One clear thing this case brings up is the topic of abortion and sex education, especially for me, sex education, because I know that when I was in high school, they didn't really tell us all that much, and I wasn't even in a religious high school or anything, but they told us that the best option was abstinence, which teenagers, most of them, not me, are gonna have sex. So, I mean, you can't just pretend like everyone's just gonna take a vow of abstinence and nothing's gonna happen. So I do really think that there needs to be some reform on that. We have to have conversations that might be uncomfortable, but if they can avoid situations like this or have people be more informed so they can avoid being in the situation at all, we need to have those conversations. It also brings up the topic of abortion, because I remember some of the comments were also saying, you know, like if she had the option to abort, then this would have gone in a different way. And I mean, we don't know if she would have taken that option, but that's also something that comes up. In spring 2017, Richardson's senior year at Carlisle High School drew to a close, and she prepared to start college at the University of Cincinnati. She had been pregnant for months by the time, but no one knew. The bump barely showed when she wore a cheerleading uniform on the sidelines or a bikini on spring break, or even when she wore a snug-fitting sparkly red gown to prom. Richardson's family told Cosmopolitan that her weight often fluctuated because of eating disorders. This is another thing I want to bring up. People mentioned that she had an eating disorder, and that's why she said, my belly is back to normal. I'm paraphrasing. That is extremely, extremely unfortunate. As someone who had an eating disorder, I know how terrible it is. That being said, we're not going to use an eating disorder as an excuse for all of this. We're really not. And it might contribute, but in the end, it is still your responsibility when there's a baby in you to take care of it. When you're at that point of pregnancy where abortion isn't even an option at that point anymore, it's your responsibility to make sure that the baby's okay. And if you have an eating disorder, I'm sorry, but you still have a baby you need to take care of, because you're the only one who can take care of it. It can't take care of itself. Over the 8-day trial, prosecutors told a tale of a teenager who killed her baby out of concern that her college plans and her good girl image were at stake. Defense attorneys insisted that the child was dead at birth, and the frightened young mother did not know what to do besides bury her. Now, I've read other articles as well that were saying that her family was deeply image-centric, like they were worried about what people would think or say. I have empathy for that, but to me, there's very little that justifies this behavior. I can understand that there's added pressure. Most teen moms don't have families that are like, hooray, you're pregnant, you know, at an inconvenient time or a time that many people don't plan anyway. So everyone has their own situation, and she had her own hard situation, but to me, there is very little that could justify burying her and piecing out. Prosecutors said they did not know how the newborn was killed, but defense attorneys said the baby girl was a lifeless, pale at delivery. She wasn't breathing. The umbilical cord wasn't attached to the placenta, recounting what her daughter eventually told her. Richardson's mother, Kim, told the Inquirer that Skylar cried as she cradled the baby for hours, waiting for the newborn to open her eyes or cry or move. The baby never did. I'm gonna sound like a broken record. This was another opportunity to ask for help. And I get it. You're scared. You know you're going to be judged. Your family's not going to be happy about it. Okay, sucks. But there is a life at stake. If you were so concerned, why wouldn't you even try calling an ambulance? It always comes back to what is the bigger picture problem here, right? And there are plenty of times that people have to make hard decisions and look at the bigger picture problem. The thing that frustrates me is that it seems like there were multiple turning points where she could have made a right decision and didn't, which is what I think the judge also felt. Finally, Richardson's mother said the teenager grabbed a garden spade from the garage and retreated to the far end of the family's expansive backyard. She dug a hole between two pine trees and covered the small grave with flowers she'd worn at prom. Still, she told no one. Her family found out only when the police arrived months later after Skylar Richardson's gynecologist reported the baby's death to the Warren County coroner, leaving the cause of death blank. It's so hard to believe that I have a grandchild that I never got to hold, her mother told the Inquirer. Richardson's attorneys blasted prosecutors for overcharging the young woman, and said they feared she might never escape the media glare. But Warren County prosecutor David Forenshell said that even after the verdict, he still believed Richardson killed her child. He stood by his office's handling of the case. I do have to say that I, like I said before, don't like how this case was handled. It just seems like a shit show overall. I still tend to think of her as guilty because she did not take any steps to help herself. Does that make sense? We owed it to that little girl, the Inquirer quoted him as saying it had to be tried. I agree, I do think it had to be tried, but again, in a different fashion. During Friday's sentencing hearing, the child's paternal grandmother, Tracy Johnson, cried as she described her son's grief and her own anguish over the loss of her first grandchild. She said she would have raised the baby herself. Last Christmas, she stayed home from family celebrations, unable to stop thinking that it would have been the first Christmas the little girl would have been old enough to love. She imagined the child opening her presents, way more toys than any child could ever play with. As we live with our grief and loss, she can now live knowing that her selfish decision was not her only choice. Johnson said of Richardson, she had a way out. At the judge's order, the child will be buried at a Richardson family plot that both families can visit. For more than 2 years, the remains had been in a sheriff's office custody. With the case now concluded, the baby will get a memorial service and a final resting place. If anything, I do hope that the families can find a certain level of closure with having the child Annabelle buried. That being said, I really do think that Richardson probably needs some counseling, and that's not only because of what happened, but it seems like prior there were plenty of issues between the eating disorder, the family that's obsessed with image. It really does seem like a lot was going on there, and again, to me, that's no excuse for her decision. It makes me understand more potentially why she made that decision, but I do stand firmly that I do think she's guilty of at least neglecting to make the right choices, even if the child was stillborn. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think this is the right sentence? Let me know. I'm very curious to hear your opinions. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons as always. Let's get right into the fan art.